reshaping frames and applying stroke effects in InDesign. So we earlier looked at some of these tools that we have, and a lot of times people wonder, what is the difference? So I have a graphic tool here, which can be a rectangle, an ellipse, or a polygon. And we also have the same tools right next door, but they're called frame tools. Basically a rectangle, an ellipse, and a polygon. Now if I were to draw one of each, and I'll just draw a square, you'll see that they look pretty much the same, and they actually do function the exact same. This comes from a prior day where we would create picture frames that had an X through them, indicating that only a graphic could be placed in it, and this would be more for just a vector object. In today's InDesign, we can use both for whatever purpose we want. So it really doesn't matter which tool you use. If I have this tool selected and did a file and place, I would be able to put a picture in it. I would be able to do the exact same thing with my frame tool. So they really are the same. Now we can always edit both of them. So whatever tool that I use over here, whichever of them that I use, either the frame or the graphic tool, I'm able to select it with my direct selection tool. Remember, that directly selects a point or a line segment, and I can then tweak this so it's completely editable. Both of them are. What happens, and I'm going to draw a circle so you can maybe see this one a little bit easier. If I use the ellipse tool and click shift to drag a circle, when I do select it, I get my handles because these are curved or smoothed points, and if I use my regular selection tool, what I see is this bounding box. This is typical around vector graphics, and what I see is 8 handles which allow me then to manipulate to change this object's size. Another useful tool that InDesign offers is located under the Object menu, and it is called Convert Shape. It's down towards the bottom. So Convert Shape allows me to convert an existing shape to a different shape. So here I have my ellipse selected on my page, and if I choose rectangle, I can change it to become a rectangle. And if I decide, no, that's not really what I want to go back to the circle, right? So here's the ellipse, and there we go. So I could select this one, and if you notice the other options that you have here, so Object, Convert Shape, there's a triangle in here. So you may have wondered, how do I get a triangle? This is it. Now if you do want some of those odd numbered shapes that aren't the traditional circle or square, you can use the Polygon tool, and that would be how you would normally create a triangle or a star or whatever type of multi-sided shape. Now let's look at the stroke. So when I apply a stroke to an object or a path, I can choose different options, and so I do have a lot of these options up here in my control panel, but even more I find under my stroke panel. And if you don't see the stroke panel in your panel dock over on the right side, go to Window and find Stroke. I'm going to drag this out so you can see this a bit more. I'll put this back. Now the stroke, notice when you have these double arrows here, that means that there's a window shade effect, and so you may only see a partial view of the stroke panel. If you click the arrows, then it will expand it. There is a lot here in the stroke panel. Let's start from the top. So the weight or the thickness, it's measured in points always. So when I increase the weight, I'm able to see that the weight of my stroke increases. So here I'm at 10 point. Now if I were to zoom in here a little bit, we're going to zoom into this using my control and space bar, and I'm looking at just the edge here. So a triangle basically has a point here, and this is going to affect my miter limit. I'll come back to caps because that's the end. A cap is the end of a stroke. But if we look at this, we have some options here to change what's called a miter limit. And the miter limit is a little confusing. It determines when a miter join will be squared off to a beveled edge. So it's the length here that we're looking at from inside to outside. Okay, so this length here. Now the default miter limit is always 4. I have no idea why, but it is always 4. So what we can do is change this miter limit, and it means that when the length of the miter reaches 4 times the stroke weight, it will automatically be squared off to a beveled edge. So if we were to increase this a lot, we could decrease this, and we would see now it's squared off. See how it did that? So in some cases what happens, and I know this is really dramatic, but if I zoom out here a moment, what happens is if this is a very harsh corner, this is not terribly bad. But if it was a lot more of a point, what happens is with the larger stroke weight, you get a really tall point that's really sharp, and it's not what you want. So then you would play with that miter limit. So if I go down here, 4 times it, so 2, this is 2 times it. Here's why we're getting it chopped off or beveled. Okay, so now let's go ahead and look at, we'll slide this off to the side. Let's select our box here. So we'll increase our stroke weight, and let's look now at our joins here. So the join is right after miter limit, and we have 3 different kinds. The first kind is our miter join, the second is our round, and the last is the bevel. And if I, again, zoom into the corner here, you're going to see this at where 2 line segments join. So right now, default is the miter join. If I do rounded, you can see how now it's just rounded, a little softer, and here's that bevel. So those are 3 ways that we can create basically our corners. The area below this is the align stroke, and this allows us to line the stroke centered on our path, or all on the inside, or all on the outside. By default, it's going to be centered. So that means in this is a 10 point, 5 are on the outside of actually my path, and 5 are on the inside. So again, the effect that you're looking for. Let's go down here and just create a line, and I'm just going to use the line tool here and increase the weight so that you can see what's happening. So back up to the caps. So these caps, like I said, are ways that we can define the appearance of this end point. So right now, it's cut off right at the anchor point. It's squared. This is called a butt cap. If I go to the second option, this is a round cap, and this is much more appealing to the eye. Basically what has happened is that it now extends in a rounded fashion to round around the anchor point. If you have multiple lines that you're sort of joining in an illustration, this is by far the best solution. And the last one then is the projecting. And of course that goes out and around. It projects out around that anchor point. So why is this different? Why do we care about this? If we have a shape that has something like this, I'm going to hold down my shift key to make a straight line. Then I'm going to go back to this first, and I'm going to drag out a little bit of a curve. Now if you have your smart guides turned on, you'll see that I have guides here indicating that this is now centered. Pretend this is a smiley face, okay? And I'll increase the stroke weight just a little bit. So this kind of smiley face, very harsh edges. If I were to select it now and do a round cap, round join, wrong one, you can see how now it's rounded a bit, looks a little bit better. If I do a bevel, has a whole different appearance. So it depends on kind of what you want, to keep clicking the wrong one, the kind of effect that you're looking for. Okay, so this is of course more harsh. The rounded always gives you a better feel, and if I do round it up here, you can see as well, a little bit softer. All right, The next thing we might as well show you up here. Let's reset this back and decrease the size a little bit so you can see. We also have ways that we can change the types of beginning and end point, and these are called the end shapes and the I'm sorry, it's right here. So the end or the start. So I have all kinds of fun things here, the arrowheads, the tail feathers. I have a lot of fun things. Now these are just the start. So if I do start, oops, I need to have it selected. Start with something like this, you can see how now there's a square, and if at the end, so this was my start point, this is my end point. Now if I choose end, I can do something like that. So there are fun ways that you can create beginning shapes or end shapes to your strokes. The last piece that I want to share with you are on dashed strokes. So if we go back up to our square here and select it, in the bottom portion of the stroke panel we have a type, and you can see that I have a bunch of different types here of strokes that have been defined already. Now if we navigate down to the dashed, so any of them that say dashed or dots, these allow us to play with how this will look. Okay, now the dash and the dots, it's a series here, and we can put in a different color actually in the gap, so you can make something look visually kind of a striped look, which is really kind of interesting. And I can actually do a tint there if I wanted to, so I could have a solid color of one and then a tint of that color for the inside. So again, lots of different options here that I can play with. Now if you notice, I went all the way down. I'll do that again because it popped out. If I go all the way down to the bottom where it says dashed, my panel expands to another section here which allows me to play with my dash and gap. Okay, and this is where the corners come into play, because right now, see how the blacks are all ending at the corners? If I do a none, you end up with some really weird funky corners, and so this allows you to adjust the gaps or adjust the dashes so that the corners fit nicely. Now here's where I can define. So right now it's a dash of 12, and if I don't have anything else here, it means 12 for my dash, 12 for my gap. Now if I were to change this and say my gap of 6, it's just a repeating pattern. So now it's a dash of 12 and a gap of 6. Now if I wanted to play with this even more, I could do something where I have a 6 here. So then it's a dash, gap, dash, gap type of an effect, and you start seeing this interesting pattern. So it's a 12, a 6, a 6, a 12, a 6, a 6, and you can see how it will just repeat this. Okay, so that's how you can customize, and if you want to go back and change it, you can. Just delete that portion out, and if I backtrack all the way, and I'm pressing tab to apply it, you can see that I'm now back to just my dash and gap equally of 12 points each. So the ability to play with these stroke effects and understanding the stroke panel is an important piece of InDesign.